Good morning, viewers. This is a small snippet on the reading of financial statements under indirect taxes. Although there is an article written on this in the KCA Journal and even in Tax Guru and CA Club India, I have just given an expert of those details in this session. A small information which will be very useful while doing your indirect tax reviews, be it your GST reviews, which you may take up on a management basis, or as a statutory auditor where you may have done your GST audits. So whether the person who is reading these financial statements of various entities is identifying the possible issues or possible value additions that may be available to these entities. Please note, this reading of financial statements will only be an indicator and will not be a conclusive evidence of any sort. But keeping this indicator in mind, it may lead to many more substantive tests which can be conducted and may also help during the internal audit and the statutory audit function. So coming to the financial statements itself, we have majorly 6 parts to it. So first, which will be there, will be the director's report. Then there will be an independent auditor report, which will then have the balance sheet, profit and loss account, and the cash flow statement. The notes to financial statements will be there after all of these details. But from a point of view to identify indicators, to identify impacts under indirect taxes, the major indicators ideally come from the director's report, the auditor's report, and the notes to financial statements. So the other balance sheet, profit and loss, and cash flow statements only give you a bird's eye view of the business and not specific indicators as such. So now we will discuss some of the balance sheet indicators. If you see, I've just given a small area-wise issues which can arise from the financial statements. First being the shareholding pattern and the details, gratuity details, government grants, trade payables, current liabilities, property, plant equipment, intangible assets, trade receivables, inventories, then GST dues, which are pending with the government authorities, and other current assets. Now, these are not all the areas under the balance sheet. These are only such areas which have a indirect tax impact, which may have an indirect tax impact. So some things just to give you an information of how one can view these impacts and identify the information that has to be collected against the same. So first thing is the trade payables. One of the major issues which is there in GST right now is the 180-day provision under Rule 37. The requirement to reverse the credit if I have not made payment to my vendor within 180 days is a compliance which most of the taxpayers are not following presently. This may come back to the assessee tenfold with penalties and interests during the departmental audits. So this is something which is suggested to be taken care of. The importance of this rule is that even if you do reverse the credit upon non-payment to vendors, you can reclaim the credit upon payment at a later stage without any time restrictions. And another important concept, which if you see the trade payables, is to verify whether there's any retention money mentioned. And if it is a retention money, that will not be covered under this Rule 37 180-day implication. So from a personal point of view, you need to obtain this breakup of this delay in payment of to vendors with respect to your ITC which has been claimed. There may be certain expenses where ITC is not claimed that would not impact the indirect taxes. Coming to other current assets, you may have certain export incentives in the form of scrips, say MEIS or SAIS script which you have received from the DGFT, which either you use it internally or in the event that you are unable to use it internally, you may sell these scripts. These scripts, when you sell, they become there is a GST liability on the same. Although it is exempt under GST, there is an implication of ITC reversal. So if you see, just by reading the export incentive wordings in other current assets, I have identified that there is a ITC implication on this entity. Coming to unbilled revenue, generally unbilled revenue arises in, say, construction contracts where milestone basis services are provided, or some other kind of service contracts where the time of supply under GST and the accounting standard revenue recognition may be different. So the taxation for the transaction may be different from what is the actual revenue which is being recognized in the books of accounts. So understand the nature of the entity and the types of transactions to identify any mismatch in the GST compliance. Coming to inventories, we have various types of inventories. We have imports, indigenous goods, where some goods may be purchased from related parties, goods which are written off or disposed, goods which are scrapped or sold further. Please note why I have written this scrap and further sale separately is that scrap is when a goods cannot be used in its original condition and is scrapped away. Further sale is when a goods is used and is further sold to be used as such original during the original purchase. So the implication here is the tax rates differ for the scrap and further sale. Coming to import and indigenous, there may be certain customs and FTP benefits which are being foregone. Many Asian countries give a benefit upon import into India. There is a CEPA agreement, there are FTA agreements. So these are over and above just GST, and this will benefit in a large manner to entities because the BCD, which is there, the basic custom duty, is always a cost. There's no credit benefit to that, and therefore, if we are able to reduce that amount, we not only reduce our cost, but it also reduces the IGST that we pay upfront and reduces our cash flow also. Purchasing from related parties, there is always an issue with respect to valuation, and then the issue coming back to the recipient on paying more taxes in the later period. So keeping this in mind, it's always better to take declarations that all the valuation with respect to related parties has been satisfied. Coming to the right of disposal, there is an disputable area where raw materials, if they are written off or disposed of without being put to use in the business, the ITC reversal is there, which I also agree to. But when the semi-finished goods or finished goods are written off or disposed for whatever business reason it is, this ITC should not be said to be ineligible, and it is supposed to be eligible, because when I purchased the raw material, the credit on such raw material was claimed because I have put it into business. After I have put it into business, what happens to those goods should not be an issue with which the GST authorities must be worried about. Although this can be used as a method of fraud, I am not speaking from that point of view. I'm speaking from a point of view of a bona fide assessee. Coming to losses, which generally take place during your business function, the manufacturing units. Here, the ITC reversal will not be required for normal losses. It would ideally apply only for your abnormal losses. So few other balance sheet items, property, plant, equipment. I've just bifurcated into some major headings, that is land and building, plant and machinery, motor vehicles. And there's one more on job work. I'll explain that later. So land and building, plant and machinery, motor vehicles, let's look at the point of view of additions and deletions, because that's where we need to focus our time and efforts upon. Additions with respect to land and building, you would be eligible for the ancillary activities. So whenever you're purchasing a land and building, these land and buildings are immovable property which do not have a GST element. But I will have certain consultants, professional fees which I pay within the process of acquiring this land and building, on which I will be able to claim the GST. Assume that I delete or I remove these land and buildings from my fixed assets. In this situation, again, there's no GST which is paid on the same, but this land and building will be considered as an exempt supply under Section 17 of the CGST Act, and therefore leading to ITC reversal under Rule 42 and 43. So this is again something that has to be kept in mind. Plant and machineries, on the other hand, generally always the ITC will be eligible. Uh, Even if the plant and machinery is having certain civil structures which are built for the purpose of the plant and machinery or construction activity which is taking place, for the purpose of the plant and machinery is functioning, the credit is eligible. Generally, this is where assessees are losing out and thinking, okay, credit is not eligible, let me not claim, but it is. Uh, and the other portion which comes is, if you remove these plant and machineries, you may be attracting section 18(6). So other than just paying the taxes on the transaction value, you will need to see whether the benefit of the ITC has overshot the GST payable, and that is coming through the section 18(6). Coming to motor vehicles, we have generally the ITC is ineligible, especially when it is used for, even though used for business purpose, but just for transportation of your employees may not be eligible. But here there are various possibilities where it is more than 13-seater ITC is eligible, where it is less than 13-seater it is not eligible. Where these where motor vehicles are used for transportation of goods, it is completely eligible. So coming to deletions, if you remove a motor vehicle from your fixed assets, what are the possible GST implications? So first thing is that you will have to pay GST on a margin method. And if I have this margin method would apply only when I have not claimed the credit upon purchase of these vehicles. So what happens is that I will be required to pay on the margin between the sale value and the written down value as per income tax. A trader, for example, will have to pay that margin on sales minus the purchase. Please note the precondition is the credit should not have been claimed against those goods. If the credit has been claimed, then the GST would have to be paid on the full tax value. If you go to notification 8/2018, the concessional rates also are provided, which is either 12 or 18%. Coming to job work, this is where the understanding of the law will override the financial statements. Generally, you will not get any information with respect to job work in the financial statements. But if a entity is actually performing this activity and providing their goods for job work, then you would have to verify the implication of this job work. The implication which arises is, if I have given the goods, say in this situation capital goods, to my job worker, and he is not returned these capital goods within 3 years, then it is deemed to be a supply under GST and I need to pay tax on the same. And it will be, the interest will apply from the date when I originally supplied. And therefore, this job work implication, even though it has an implication on capital goods, will not arise directly in the balance sheet. So there may be certain items which are which the implication arises out of GST, and then we need to verify in the financial statements. Coming to intangible assets, there are certain assets which like software which may be used by multiple locations. Like, as you know, GST is a state law also, where GSTINs are provided for each state, and sometimes you may have more than one GSTIN in a state also. So the implication is that when an asset is being used on a PAN basis for the entire entity, then who is the which is the actual entity having these charges? Then the cross charge implication may arise, wherein they need to cross charge for utilization of the softwares by other branches. So this is again a GST implication, which ideally is revenue neutral, wherein you would not have to pay the tax because the credit will be claimed by the other units of the same PAN. But in the event you do not disclose these cross-charge transactions, then there could be a tax cost. So now that we have completed the balance sheet items, we are coming to the profit and loss. Now, if you see, there are many more issues which have an implication on the indirect taxes in the profit and loss area. So I will not go into depth into any of these. I have given some examples in the slides. So first thing, which is my revenue from operations, this is your heart of the financial statements review under IGST, I mean under indirect taxes. Here is where you can identify certain information, that is who are my customers, whether they are foreign or domestic, whether it's B2C or B2B, what are my payment terms with respect to these customers. How does this help? It lets me identify the levy under GST, what is the valuation, the classification of the goods or services, time of supply, place of supply. Also, it gives additional indicators such as requirement under e-invoice, state product linked incentive schemes applicability. So various details can be obtained just by seeing the revenue from operations. If you see, the revenue from operations is just 4 to 5 line items at most, but with just that much, you'll be able to get a lot of information with respect to indirect taxes. Now, this is only indicator. You need to obtain additional information and verify these details, but this is what it indicates. Segment reporting, when we come to, these are the details of the sales which are performed geographically. This will help you understand whether there is a possibility of SEIS, MEIS or ODTEP benefit which can be realized, which has not been realized. If you link this back to your other current assets, you can see whether if I have my segment outside India and I'm selling goods to them, then have I taken the MEIS benefit? Have I received MEIS script? So if that script is not there in my what do you call other current assets, I will understand that they have not applied, or they may not have applied for the script and have lost out on a benefit. This is just purely by seeing the financial statement. Coming to freight, we have certain details, invoices, contracts which we can obtain. And why is this important? This is important because we first need to identify whether my transport vendor is a GTA or a GTO. The difference being, a GTA is required to provide a consignment note having certain details, and a GTO is not. The GST implication is that GTA is liable under reverse charge at 5%, and there's a forward charge mechanism at 12%. But GTO is exempt. So when does the transaction apply is something that may need to be identified. Coming to your communication costs, here the majority of the businesses miss out on providing their GST number. Say I have a Airtel internet connection in my office. I have not given my GST number to them. They will be considering it as a B2C transaction, and I will not be obtaining any credits, and I will not be eligible because it is not reflecting in my GSTR 2A. So generally communication costs, banking costs, this is a general issue which is seen, and this is something you can verify during your review. Food and beverages, here again, there are various possibilities. First thing is that if there's a canteen in a factory, and based on your state factory rules, it may be mandated that these canteens are provided. Once that is mandated, the credit in relation to the same is eligible, even if it is provided to us at 5%. Next thing is water credit. There are many bottled water. If you see those Bisleri water bottles which come, I think I have one with me here. So that Bisleri water bottle is something that is a bottled sealed water against which there is a GST of 12%. Now that is not a beverage under GST. There's a Supreme Court decision, I think way back in 1999 on this, which said that water is not a beverage, and therefore the water credit is eligible. So other than this, generally the food and beverages credit would be ineligible. Coming to our employee benefits and their expenses, as we all know, salary is part of Schedule 3 of the GST, and there would be no GST implication. But there may be certain staff welfare expenses which may have an ITC implication. Now, coming to health and life insurance, the credit is ineligible. But what about other insurances with respect to your employees? You have fidelity insurance. You may have even personal accident insurance. You will have gratuity insurance with respect to them, EDLI insurance. Now, these are insurances which are not linked to life or health. The credit in relation to the same is eligible. If you are buying water, medicine, these are can be said to be eligible. But if you're buying gifts or giving them taking them on a recreational trip, there may be a possibility that the credit is not eligible. So what I intend to say at the end of this is, take the credit on a case basis, verify in depth on the eligibility, and read the section 17.5 very carefully. Coming to the conveyance, details of the vehicles which I use, the persons who have traveled would be very important. Uh, because if I am using a vehicle for transporting my director, then that credit may not be eligible. But if I have used it to transport women employees beyond 8:30 p.m., it is a statutory obligation and the credit can be said to be eligible. There is also implication of RCM liability on the rent-a-cab. So whatever reimbursements I'm providing to my employees against the rent-a-cabs may also be liable. Please note, if you're taking Ola, Uber, they are generally charging the 5%. But if you take another vendor who is not registered, or is registered but is not a company, then the reverse charge would have to be paid by the company, the recipient being a company. So if I buy a bus which is more than 13-seater, use it for my employee transport, is the credit eligible? The answer is yes. Coming to professional fees, we have ITC eligibility and RCM on import of services. This is generally very simple and fair, where most people will be claiming the credits, as the professionals who are registered will be charging the taxes, which would ideally be on 18%. The implication which needs to be identified is the import of services. So certain cases, the payments against professional services will be made through credit card, which generally will not be verified, and therefore the implication of RCM on import of services may be missed. Sometimes even there may be some foreign expenses which have not been verified, which also may have an import of service implication. So suggest the reviewer to take the form 27Q under income tax or the 15C and 15CB and verify whether these transactions may be liable under RCM. There may be certain expenses where the place of supply against those services falls outside India and therefore would not be liable to RCM. So it cannot be said that I can charge GST on the entire foreign expenditure at 18%. That would be incorrect. Coming to legal fees, as we all know, advocates providing services, any kind of legal services, not just representational services, is liable under reverse charge. And I would be eligible for the credit to the extent that it's related to my business and my outward supply is taxable. Rates and tax and subscriptions. This is an area in the financial statement which ideally needs a lot of focus, because there is this RCM liability on central government, state government, and local authority services. Now, these services, some of them being exempt, some of them specifically not provided by CGSG or LA. It may be provided by governmental authority or government entity. So verifying notification 12/2017, reading the definitions in the CGST Act, identifying whether the service is exempt or not is very, very important. And if not, then there could be an RCM liability which has been missed. Subscriptions, again, similar to the professional fees, which may have an import of service implication. Coming to the IT costs, there is a requirement of ISD, which is the input service distributor, whether the credit in relation to the IT costs, which is your information technology costs, is to be transferred to your other entities having the same GST number. The answer is yes. Generally, these IT vendors will provide invoices to the HO, which is the head office, but the ideal methodology is to obtain ISD registration, provide the ISD GSTN to the vendor, obtain the credit there, and transfer it to all the units having the GSTNs under the same PAN. There, of course, was a recent service tax ruling which said that this ISD may not be applicable and it is not mandatory, but the provisions under GST are a little different. and the wordings which were there under service tax and the wordings which are there under GST are not the same. Now we have completed the profit and loss instances. Please note I have not covered all of them due to paucity of time, but those were the important ones which would have to be considered. Coming to your other transactions or other details which may arise in the audited financial statements, from which we can get certain inferences. One is the brand expenses. There may be group entity details, ownership of certain brand. Now, this brand could also be a service and which may lead to related party deemed liability, which means that if some other entity is using the same brand, then there could be a GST liability. The issue which arises is valuation difficulty. How do I value a brand? It is something which is intangible. There may be a value given to the brand, but what is the value of us giving the temporary transfer or the right to use of the brand? What would be that value? So there is a concept that if value fails, levy fails. So that concept may come to your aid, wherein even if you have missed to consider this liability, you can always take the supporting that valuation is not possible and therefore levy fails. Working capital issues, generally, if you see IPO offerings, high interest on overdrafts, high big amount of loans, then you can identify that the entity has working capital issues. Why is this important? Once you identify that the entity does have working capital issues, you can then verify how they are paying the vendors. Are the vendors' GST rates accurate? Is there a concessional rate which is possible against your imports, your purchases? And therefore reduce the working capital implication for the entity through indirect taxes. Coming to miscellaneous income, there are many incomes which may arise in the miscellaneous income, which also some may not be having a GST impact. Say, for example, interest on FD or any loans, those incomes will not have any implication in GST, but scrip sale, profit and loss on sale of asset, CER, which is that related to emission, which is given by the United Nations bodies, where they're allowing to provide scripts, certain certificates which can be traded on the international exchange. So these also are considered as securities, and then whether securities is a goods or service, it is a vast area under GST. So miscellaneous income is a point in the financial statements where you will not obtain this level of details, which means that you will have to go one level further and do a TV review or a ledger review and obtain the details. Identify if there is any excess or short GST which has been discharged. Requirements of registration under the acts. If you see listed companies financial statements, you will be able to identify what are the various acts applicable to that entity. So say a transport provider, he will be liable under Carriages Act, Motor Vehicles Act, Electricity Act, Pollution Act, etc. Of course, Companies Act, Income Tax, GST, all those are the normal tax related acts. So how does this help us? The implication is we can identify whether there could be an RCM liability. For example, recently there was an information on national permits where it said that the liability with respect to the same is exempt going forward. So what about the past? Is it deemed to be liable? Do I need to pay under reverse charge? So that is something which recently came up, and that the liability didn't arise from GST law specifically. The permits were given based on the Motor Vehicles Act. So knowing other laws, allied laws, linked laws, reading them, identifying what are the costs which are paid by the entity to those through those acts is very important. Coming to directors' payments, we have services by directors, but not in the course of directorship. So generally, the RCM is liable for services by the director in the course of your directorship, other than those who are the employees of the entity. So say sitting fees generally would be liable to reverse charge. But if a person like a director is providing rent to the entity, then he would not be liable to, the company would not be liable to pay reverse charge on the rent received, because the rent is not in the director's capacity, it is in the personal capacity. So in an instance where any tax, it's not just for the RCM or director's payment, any tax under GST which is not payable but has been paid incorrectly, it is no more a tax. It is just a payment which has been made to the government, and you can take a refund of the same. Even the time limit of 2 years, which is there under GST, can be disputed under Article 265, which says that this is equality must be available, and no tax must be paid which is not leviable by law. So in this situation, it was not a leviable tax, and therefore the time limit would not apply because it's not a tax. Coming to other inferences under financial statements and GST. Now, these are informations which do not come in the profit and loss or the balance sheet. These ideally come in the only in the notes to accounts. So in the Forex, you get information with respect to imports. You get reflects to outward also. So with respect to the outward, in relation to refund applications, you even for goods and services, now you are required to provide the FIRC or the EBRC, which is the proof of receipt of this forex. So this is an indication that they ideally have these transactions, and whether they are applying for refund and whether their refund applications are accurate is something that can be verified under indirect taxes. Imports I've already spoken about. I will not spend time there. Contingent liabilities. This is something which may or may not have a GST implication. For example, those having a GST implication is a corporate guarantee, where there is no cost which is available, but it is a person a guarantee given by a say a parent company to its subsidiary company on a loan, and therefore that activity can be deemed as a service. And because the transaction is deemed as a service, then even if there is no value between the two parties, it is deemed as a supply, and even without consultation, there may be a GST liability. There may be certain payments to governments which are disputed. Generally, this is the pattern which I have seen in the financial statements, and from there you can identify whether there are any RCM liabilities. So notes to accounts, opinions of auditors, the director's report, these also give a lot of information with respect to what the auditor is feeling, what the directors have seen in their business, what are the changes. So capital expenditure details, this may be linked to say your PLI scheme, state incentives, and even your emphasis of matter being part of your independent auditor's report may help indicate certain issues which you may like to have a look at, and then see the indirect tax implication on the same. So that is it with respect to the reading of financial statements under indirect taxes. So how does one obtain these financial statements? How do I improve my skills on reading financial statements? First thing is, for all listed companies which is listed on the National Stock Exchange, the details will be available on their website. Generally, this will be available within 3 months of the financial year end. If it is not, if you are already doing these assignments for your entities, obtain it from the client themselves. If not, if you want to just learn or you are practicing the art of reading financial statements, you can download from the MCA portal itself for a minimal fee based on the SIN number. So here you do not need any specific details or any approval from the client. Download also from the GST portal. If that is already a running GST client of yours, you can obtain the balance sheet and P&L based on the GSTR 9Cs which have been filed. So I've just given some of the well-known listed companies in India. One being the Maruti Suzuki for automobile, banking, HDFC, software, we have Infosys TCS, consumer goods, Hindustan Unilever. So why I've given various types of sectors? Because the GST implication for various types of sectors. So one dealing with manufacture, one dealing with banking, one dealing with services, one dealing with consumer goods, retail. So even there are other types of industries also which you can look at. But this will, if you do the financial statements reading under IDT, keeping in mind these points, maybe you will be able to identify certain issues which even the statutory auditor may not have identified. So one of the statements which I always use is practice until you can't get it wrong. So all the best. I hope this video was useful for you. And if you have any doubts, you can please send your queries to the email IDs on the screen. So thank you for your patient listening.